97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco. Powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
He's in! Touchdown!
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
It's the Sports Bash Live. Mike and Broads. Andrew DiCecco at A. DiCecco NFL is in for the Friday edition of Football at 4. Let's do it now as we've been talking a lot of Eagles, a lot of off-season stuff to kind of get you ready for training camp, which, believe it or not, isn't all that far away now. I mean, with all the other sports not doing anything, the football season is creeping closer and closer, which means it might be time to actually take a look at some of the competition. Let's take a brief look now at some of those teams with Andrew DiCecco here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. All right, Happy Hour Friday. You better be prepared today, A. DiCecco. What is the Happy Hour Friday beverage for you?
You know, I live just outside of Westchester, so probably something from Levante Brewing. They make a nice IPA, so I like to support them any chance I can.
All right, so this time you had something a little bit more prepared. Here we go. Broad said he's getting something this weekend. I'll give you my pick later on. All right, let's look at
no White Claw. No White Claw from you guys.
He brought the White Claws to my house last weekend. I appeased him, but I mean I was one and done.
I saw that picture.
I was passing them out to my buddies, like, "Hey, anybody want one of these?"
Yeah, guess what? They were like, "Yeah, bring them on, baby."
There you go.
All right, let's look at the NFC East. Let's take a little look inside the division. We've talked a lot of Eagles leading up to this, but what about the – let's get the overview right now because the Giants and Washington have been abysmal for at least 4 or 5 seasons now. Is it about time that this division gets a little bit more difficult? Do you think that those two teams have improved to make this more than a two-team race?
I do, but not to the extent where they're going to contend that there will be, in contention for the NFC East. Especially those are two teams that you mentioned in Washington and New York that really could have benefited from, a full off season, getting, new coaches in with the Giants would be Joe Judge and Ron Rivera with the Washington Redskins, of course. So, when looking at the Giants, we'll start with them. They added Patrick Graham as defensive coordinator from the Miami Dolphins. He was there for a year. He likes to show a lot of exotic blitzes. You're going to see a lot of third down blitzes, and he sends defensive backs and linebackers. Apparently he's going to be using a lot of the different concepts from his stops along the way. He was with the Patriots, so it's going to be a blend of things he's kind of gathered throughout his NFL career as a coach. And then you're going to see a receiving core that they don't necessarily have the size. They do have some speed with Darius Slayton, but you have a collection of slot receivers essentially in Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard. Now, Evan Ingram is going to be the player to watch here. If he can remain healthy, you look at what Jason Garrett, who's their new offensive coordinator, his history of using 2 tight end sets and getting creative in how he can move certain weapons around. I think you're going to see, Evan Ingram split out wide. You'll see him in different formations there. So if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a player to watch, especially for fantasy purposes. He'll be a guy to keep an eye on. So there's a lot of talent there in New York. I just don't necessarily think that they're going to have the time to kind of come together quick enough to get everybody on the same page. And especially with Daniel Jones, you saw what he was able to do at the end of last season. He really put together a string of games that was encouraging, but now you have to get used to, different verbiage, new concepts, and get used to what Jason Garrett likes to do, because it's going to be it's a vastly different system from what he's used to.
Do you think that Darius Slayton could cause trouble for Darius Slay?
Well, it's different because now you're going to get his second year in the NFL. When he came into the NFL, if you remember, Hunter, I believe he was a 5th round pick from Auburn. There wasn't a ton of – he came in with relatively low expectations. Nobody really knew what to expect from him. But he was kind of thrust into the lineup out of necessity, and teams didn't really have a chance to game plan for him. And he was just taking the top off guys. You saw what he did to Ronald Darby and the Eagles secondary, of course. So now it'll be interesting to see how he fares against NFL, like starting caliber corners, knowing that, teams have a full offseason to kind of evaluate him, what he does well, some of the things that he doesn't do well, and kind of take advantage of that matchup. But he does have the speed, and he does have a very efficient release off the line. So those are two things right there that's always going to give you somewhat of an advantage in every game.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Washington, the last couple of years, their big problem has really been skill positions. I mean, the quarterback has been abysmal there. They've really had no, big-time wide receivers. How is their offense, with Haskins? How do you perceive the offense to be? Rivera is a defensive-minded guy. So how will the Washington offense look?
So he brought with him Scott Turner, who was the quarterback's coach for Carolina, and he was the interim offensive coordinator. He got his position elevated. You're going to see what he's known for is kind of giving quarterbacks the flexibility to have a little bit more freedom at the line of scrimmage and pretty much simplifying things. So like he had Kyle Allen last year, for example. And Kyle Allen wasn't a world beater by any stretch, but he was successful in certain schemes and in certain games week to week. There was times where he was an efficient quarterback. And Teddy Bridgewater, going back even further with the Vikings, he had some spurts of good play, and that was with Scott Turner. He also mentioned in his video conference that he mentioned three guys: Steven Sims, his wide receiver, Antonio Gibson, and J.D. McKissick. Those are three guys that are explosive, fast, and effective in space. And he kind of mentioned that he was looking to find creative ways to get those guys the football. So you're not going to see a traditional Washington offense that we've grown accustomed to in recent years. I think you're going to see a lot of movable parts, a lot of speed, and a lot of guys taking advantage of one-on-one matchups.
How about Jordan Reed? Do you think he will continue to go out there after all these concussions?
No, I think that's when you look at the Washington offense, I think that's the one weak point there is the tight end position. Jordan Reed, when he's been healthy, as you know, he's been very effective. He's been an eagle killer, something of an eagle killer in his career. But that's a guy that you can't necessarily go into the season counting on. But they do have a young contingent of pass catchers that I'm pretty intrigued with. Steven Sims is another guy who made the team as an undrafted free agent last season. He, I believe he had like 26.5 yards per kick return or something like that, and he contributed with 34 catches on the year, I believe. So, and he started to build that rapport with Dwayne Haskins. I think I saw a video of him working out with him, getting that rapport down. So he's a guy I expect to take that next step. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, he closed in on 1,000 yards last season, didn't quite get that. I think you're going to see him eclipse that 1,000 yards and take that next step towards NFL stardom. And then you have Trey Quinn from SMU. He stepped up last season, and he's going to have another year moving forward. And they drafted Antonio Golden from Liberty. He's 6'4", not a burner, but he has that height, and he's good at high pointing the football and taking advantage of contested catch situations. So I think that when you see when looking at the Eagles secondary, they don't offer a ton of size. So if he's able to get on the same page this summer and can contribute to the offense, he can give teams some problems there.
All right, Football 4, Andrew DiCecco, powered by Inside the Birds. What about Haskins? What should we, is this guy I don't want to say, a franchise quarterback? When you say that, you think of like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, but is he a starting quarterback that can take a team to the playoffs and then who knows?
Well, right now there's not enough data to say one way or the other. I think he really needs another season before we can actually label him as a bona fide NFL starter, a fringe starter, or somebody who's going to kind of flame out and be more of a backup for his career. He showed signs, just like most rookies, just like Daniel Jones. He showed signs of being a competent player, the guy that they drafted him to be. But then there's also times where maybe whether it was the offensive system that didn't quite fit his skill set or just, mechanical issues that he kind of struggled there. But, now he's getting this work in. We talked about Carson Wentz earlier this week, getting that work in Houston. Now you see Dwayne Haskins also taking advantage of some of this downtime, getting on the same page as some of his offensive weapons. So he's taken the necessary steps. Now we just need to see if he's able to put it all together. Again, he's going to have to get adjusted to a new offensive coordinator. And so that's not necessarily, an overnight fix. So it all depends on how quickly he's able to retain information and apply it to the field.
Yeah, one thing when, the Eagles open up with Washington, by the way, And you look at when the Eagles match up with them, one problem has constantly been their pass rush. It seems that the Eagles with Lane Johnson and Jason Peters, even with those two guys, they've still had their issues. And you wonder, what is the Washington pass rush and defense going to be, and how is it going to be different now with Ron Rivera?
Well, to me, Washington has the top defensive line in football, and it's not necessarily close. Not just their starters. You have Montez Sweat, you got Ryan Kerrigan, you have Deron Payne. You have backing them up, you have Matt Ioannidis, you have Trayvon Hester, who was formerly with the Eagles. And you have Caleb Brantley from Florida, I believe. So you have not only is your first line extremely potent, your second line, and we haven't even gotten into Chase Young yet, who they've added. So I mean, you have this, you're at least 8 pass rushers deep. So they're not going to put up a ton of points, but their pass rush is going to keep them in games. Might even win them some close games down the stretch or at certain points of the season, but. I mean, they're going to give – I don't care how good your offensive line is. They have the talent up front to give pretty much any offensive line problems.
How much credibility, if you will, does Rivera give them as opposed to Gruden being the head coach there?
Well, he gives them a lot of credibility. Ron Rivera is a guy who kind of worked his way up the hard way. I mean, let's not forget, he was the Eagles linebackers coach in the early 2000s. And he worked his way up to being, a head coach with the Panthers. Of course, they went to the Super Bowl, and he brings that defensive hard-nosed mentality. A lot of guys like playing hard. They play hard for Ron Rivera, and I think being able to command a room like he has over the years, and having that lengthy resume that he has, it's really going to resonate with a lot of guys. So that was a great hire, in my opinion, by Washington.
Does anyone know what to expect from Joe Judge?
Joe Judge, I don't know if you heard the latest Inside the Birds podcast with Greg Cosell, but he wasn't too familiar with Joe Judge either. I don't think anyone knows what to fully expect from Joe Judge other than him coming from, a winning organization. He was an assistant coach with Alabama, and he was with the Patriots for a number of years. So I would anticipate seeing some Belichick concepts with Joe Judge and kind of that type of demeanor. And being in those type of systems, being with Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, they're going to rub off on you one way or the other. So look for the Giants to be, a more disciplined team and probably a more refined team from what we've grown accustomed to seeing over the past few seasons.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, Football 4. Let's move over to the Giants then and kind of dive into those guys a little bit. Real quick, before we go to the Giants, Washington improved, or are they still like a 4-12, 5-11 team? They seem improved. It sounds like, you mentioned the defensive line, which was kind of an eye-opening comment, by the way. Best in football and not even close. But do you look at them as improved or still not really ready to make, be more than a 4-5 win team?
Well, the reason why I'm not willing to say they're much more than a 5 or 6 win team, in my opinion, is that they don't have this time to get acclimated to Scott Turner and Jack Del Rio, of course, to get his unit firing on all cylinders. Had it been a full offseason, where we're able to kind of gauge where Dwayne Haskins is a little bit better, I would be more inclined to say, yeah, you know what, maybe they'll be 6-7 wins. But there's too much uncertainty there. Obviously, you're bringing in guys like they brought in Kendall Fuller and Ronald Darby in free agency. So they're going to be fighting it out to start for one corner position. And then their safeties, Landon Collins, they signed him to a mega deal last offseason. And they have Sean Davis, I believe, who they brought over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those are guys that they're physical box safeties, but, they can be exposed on the back end in coverage. So they have some questions. Their pass is going to be to have the offensive, the weaponry to kind of keep them, keeping pace with some of these explosive teams around the NFL.
Andrew DiCecco, let's move over to the Giants. You write at InsideTheBirds.com, Big Blue improved, but enough. What are some of the moves this offseason that they made that would improve this team? Because they've been bad on the defensive side of the ball. Specifically, the offensive line has been a problem for them. So where have they improved? Well,
I like James Bradbury. I like that corner that they added from the Carolina Panthers. He's He's efficient in man and zone coverage. Didn't get a ton of buzz, coming out of Carolina, but he's a very physical player. He's a lengthy player, and he gives the Giants a corner that can kind of shadow the opposition's top receiver, which they sorely needed. They gave him away a lot of games over last season, due to poor secondary play. We don't know what's going to happen with DeAndre Baker, but they do have, young corners there, such as, Corey Ballantyne, who was drafted out of Washburn last season. And then you have Holmes, so he's immediately, kind of bolster that position there. And then, when you look at the offensive side of the football, what has been their problem over the past number of seasons? Feels like forever. Their offensive line play. They tried everything, right? They brought in Nate Solder. He was a free agent bust. But what I really like what they did in the offseason, drafting him, the offensive tackle in this draft class.
Let's put Andrew. He's got some phone issues, obviously. There, we kept going in and out with him there, so we'll bring him back in just a second. Football at 4. Andrew DiCecco here, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Talked a little bit about Washington. Over to the Giants now. And how about the comment? That was an eye-opening comment about Washington, that not only do they have the best defensive line in the league, he doesn't think it's particularly close. I was like, that's interesting.
You know what I thought of when he said that? I thought of Andre Dillard.
Right,
Good
exactly.
Luck. Good luck, buddy.
Well, is that why you keep Jason Peters on speed dial there? Like, hey, look what we got to face twice here. In the first game of the year, you're matched up against that Washington team, and you don't have a whole heck of a lot of This is where grass time is going to start coming up all the time now. You don't get a lot of grass time, and Andre Dillard is matched up in that first game against Chase Young potentially.
Yeah, that's an interesting matchup. I mean, really, that's something where obviously the standard football fans or the casual football fan wouldn't really be like, "Oh, let's watch a left tackle go up against another player or whatever." But us, that's something that I'm super intrigued by.
Well, when you get to that game on the calendar in week number 1, and you're starting to really get into it and break it down, and here we are on game week, you're thinking to yourself, "What's a key matchup?" Well, it's Andre Dillard up against Chase Young potentially. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation to have, and I can't wait to have it that week that you're speaking about.
All right, let's go back to Andrew DiCecco. You were talking about the Giants' weakness being that offensive line, and they've been abysmal up front.
They've been terrible up front, but they drafted Andrew Thomas, who I felt was the safest of the offensive tackles in this loaded draft class. Really like that. I think he's ready to play. He's a plug-and-play option from day one, and then you added Shane Lemieux. He was a proficient guard from, I believe, from LSU, and then you added Matt Peart, the other offensive tackle from UConn. He's not necessarily ready to play just yet, but they've added young pieces here. It hasn't worked out with Nate Solder, but there's all of a sudden you have a young contingent of offensive linemen that are ready to grow with Daniel Jones. So I like the approach that they took this offseason. They had a lot of deficiencies throughout their entire roster, but I think they've taken the necessary steps to kind of fortify some of those problem areas.
Now, one area that they have been pretty good is skill positions. They got Barkley. They drafted Jones, and we'll see with him. You mentioned the wide receivers a little bit earlier there. Do you like where they are with the skill position players?
Well, they have a kind of an odd grouping of positional players, right? So I kind of got into it. They have Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard. That's their top 2 receivers. They're best used, running these deep in cuts and slant routes and getting those guys on the move. You saw what Golden Tate had historically after the catch. He's like a running back after the catch. But then you have Darius Slayton, who gives the offense that vertical element. And you have Evan Ingram, who, if he stays healthy, he's going to be the X factor. Obviously, Saquon's the problem. The offense runs through him. But I think the real X factor this year is going to be Evan Ingram because he can do so many different things. He's kind of like, I guess he had like a 75-yard touchdown last season, and he looked like a wide receiver on the move. And so if he can stay healthy and give you a full season of those type of plays, they're going to be in good shape.
Now, remember, we're talking about the skill position, but this is going back when they had like Odell Beckham and stuff. Obviously, he's gone, and they brought some new guys in, so they have a different look last year and now moving forward, going forward here. Now, when they match up with Philly, where is that kind of matchup problem for Philadelphia against the Giants?
I still think they're going to have to I think the Eagles, we don't know what their secondary is going to be, what they're going to be this season. We know that they have Darius Slay, but then there's a lot of unsettled, a lot of unsettled roster battles that still need to kind of play out this summer. And until we see that kind of take place, we don't know if they've upgraded and they have enough guys to be able to cover, the Giants wide receiving core. So I would say secondary until proven otherwise. I mean, on paper they look like they've made the upgrades, but we still need to see that play out on the football field.
Who do you think of these two teams finish last in the division? Unless you think it's either going to be the Eagles or Cowboys, but I highly doubt that.
No, I think the Giants finish last in the division, simply because their defense is upgraded, but they don't have a calling card, a signature aspect of their defense. They don't have that vaunted pass rush that the Washington Redskins have. So, and I like Washington's pass catchers, led by Terry McLaurin, but they do have that young group that if they can really put it all together, they can surprise. I don't think New York's ready to take that jump yet. They're headed in the right direction, but not quite there.
Real quick, let's flip over to Dallas and kind of get a quick thought on number one. When you stacked them up against Philly right now, which 53, I know that we're obviously not at 53s, but whose roster do you like better?
Well, I like the Eagles roster better, but it's close. Obviously I would take Carson Wentz over Dak Prescott. He's a superior quarterback leading the offense. The Eagles have some questions there at receiver. Adam kind of got into that last yesterday when you spoke with him. You have Deshaun Jackson, and a lot is riding on his health. There's a lot of uncertainty behind him. You're not going to start the season without Alshon Jeffrey. You're really counting on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside to take that next step in his development, but we're not sure because we haven't really seen much of him. But obviously Dallas, they added C.D. Lamb. They have Amari Cooper there. But I'm taking Carson Wentz 10 out of 10 times. As far as leading the offense, I think he gives them that added advantage. The defenses are pretty similar, pretty close. Dallas still has safety concern, but the Eagles do have some uncertainty at the safety position as well. So I think it's a lot closer than some may realize, but I like the Eagles.
How big of an upgrade is Mike McCarthy over Jason Garrett?
I don't necessarily. To me, it's almost like they just kind of swap coaches out. I don't necessarily know that it was an upgrade. It seems more like a lateral move to me. Mike McCarthy had his tendencies caught up to him at the end of his Green Bay Packers tenure, and he didn't really show a willingness to adapt. Same with Jason Garrett. His offenses weren't very imaginative. They weren't very creative. I still think that, he does have a ton of experience, and, maybe he'll change a little bit and really get the most out of Dak Prescott and really maximize the talent he has on offense. But I don't necessarily think that it was such a vast upgrade over Jason Garrett.
All right, we will dive more into the Cowboys in the NFC East and some of the other teams around the league as Football at 4 continues throughout the summer. Andrew DiCecco, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. And, of course, you can read more on the Eagles from Andrew at 97.3 ESPN.com. He will be covering the Eagles, hopefully, when they get back out there. And it looks like training camp dates could be set here shortly. We'll have all the info here on Football at 4. All right, man, take care.
You too, guys. Have a great weekend.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.